So my name is Kyle Bland. I'm the director of data analytics and research for pitcherlist.com. We are a baseball website. We generally focus on fantasy, but we are also branching out into broader baseball analysis and inclusion of kind of more of our own unique metrics to fold into both that broader baseball analysis and fantasy analysis. I'm here to talk about one of our newest stats that we've been implementing on the site, and we talked about last year, Process Plus. It's quality adjusted hitter metrics at the per pitch level. So the question that I went into this with was, what insights can we take about hitter talent and performance using pitch quality model? Things like stuff, location, pitching plus, like we have publicly available models now that are at the pitch level. Can we use those as inputs to tell us more about the hitter? And then with those findings, can we interpret them in a way that is consistent with the way the game is discussed? And that's particularly relevant to me working for a baseball website where it's not to a team, it's not to a specifically mathematics or analytics focused community, that I need to be able to explain a lot of this to the layperson. So talking in broader baseball language was a benefit for me. The background for this was I've always been hearing about, oh, he makes good swing decisions, but there wasn't really a ton of great stats out there. And I know a lot of work has been done more recently, but my idea, like the driving force behind this, started with me years and years ago. And the idea extends to, we want to making contact and hitting for power, that we know different pitches have different impacts on how easy it is to actually hit them and how easy it is to hit them for extra bases. Some context that's missing from these stats that we're looking to incorporate will be outcome valuation. So putting things like making contact on a run scale rather than just a binary, did they make contact or not? Count valuation, a ball in a zero ball count is a lot different than a ball in a 3-ball count. Pitch location, that different locations have different benefits depending on what the count context is and the pitch thrown. And then pitch quality, how good was it? How nasty was it? That kind of thing of, a fastball at 100 miles an hour is a lot different than a fastball at 93, or a breaking ball with 10 inches of movement is different than one with 0 or with 15. So here's an example taking into account pitch location. This is strictly just 2024 pulled from Baseball Savant, their run outcomes, that taking a pitch in the zone, generally good. It's worth about 5 runs per 100 takes. Taking a pitch out of the zone, or in the zone, sorry, is bad. It's worth another about 5 runs negative per 100 takes. But swings are more interesting, because swings, if you swing at a pitch out of the zone, if you chase, that's worth roughly the same demerit as taking a ball down the middle. That is worth about 6 runs. It costs the hitter per 100 swings, but actually swinging at a pitch in the zone, which is generally assumed to be a good thing, is actually neutral to even slightly minus. And I think that's something that's counterintuitive to a lot of people, because it's a little bit random. You spin the roulette wheel of, okay, you swung in the zone, but you also still need to make contact at that pitch, and even conditional on you making contact, you need to hit that ball into play and not at a defender or into foul play. So this is a more granular, bucketed by single square inches. This is a standardized strike zone. So the hitters will be on the left side of the plot, and it assumes the top and bottom are the same for every hitter. It shows that here, even though they are individualized at the per hitter level. And so there are relatively few locations in the zone that are positive to swing at. And you can see, okay, again, the hitter is to the left of the plot. So generally middle is good, but even middle and slightly in and slightly down seems to be that sweet spot of where, when the league swings, the league adds value for that swing decision. And it's pretty easy to see taking in the zone bad, taking out of the zone good. And you can see, especially at that top left, that's generally a hit by batter. So those are the best ones, because you're in a single pitch, no matter the count, guaranteed first base. Moving on to contact, that making contact varies positively and negatively even within the zone. Of course, the most positive values are generally within the zone. And then the further you get from that, or as I like to kind of think of it, the path of the barrel of the bat. So because hitters are the point at which the bat rotates. It can be level at the top of the zone or a very vertical bat path if they're hitting low and inside the zone. And so you can see that kind of diagonal line from low and inside to up and away is generally, that's positive value contact is being added. And that's even true of outside the zone, although I would probably, without digging into that too much, it's probably just fouling off 2-strike pitches, which is generally going to be somewhat positive, or putting them into play. And then finally, we have power. So this, again, is just looking at league-wide results. A lot of red. These were all on the same scale. So 10 runs per observation. So it was per pitch for decisions, per swing for contact, and this is per batted ball. So a lot of red. It kind of follows a similar path to contact of down and in to up and away. And then even, especially down and in, even out of the zone, generally is more valuable than up and away to a slight extent. So the initial context, we now have a much richer data set available to the public, which again, I'm a member of in recent years, and we can now fill in some of that missing context. To do that, I like to think of it as, rather than outputting a singular run value, which I know some models do and they're very good at and very informative, I like to think of it in terms of outcomes, hierarchical of, did they swing or not? If they swung, did they make contact or not? If they made contact or not, what kind of batted ball it was. And I think that helps provide that it's numbers, it's math, it's statistics, it's very relevant, but it can be used as a storytelling device. So our PLV model, so pitch level value that we host on our website on PitcherList, is trained from MLB data 2020, 2023. Again, combination of XGBoost classifier submodels for that hierarchy, inputs being location, velo, movement, where the ball was released, what count it's in, and then some engineered features, some combinations of those. And then the outputs, again, are per pitch likelihoods for each of those outcomes. This is just a slide showing our model calibration on the estimates. I'm generally pretty pleased with these, even with some of the batted ball outcomes. To get to the batted ball outcomes, we actually predicted launch angle and exit velo buckets, and then ascribed a generic, basically probability distribution for each of those outcomes. So a hard hit ball at 20-degree launch angle is going to have a high double likelihood, versus a weakly hit ground ball is going to have a high out likelihood. And that's how we worked from the model to applying the outputs into the specific observed batted ball outcomes. So we'll start with the first step of this hitter stat that I'm here to talk about, which is decisions plus, and how we get there. So now we have, for every pitch, we have this suite of predicted outcomes, and each of those has a value dependent on the count that it's in. Like I said before, a 3-ball count is a lot different than a 0-ball count if you're taking a ball. So with that, we can then weight what the outcomes are and then use that as a weighted sum to be like, this is what the value of this pitch is given the likelihood, the outcome likelihoods, and the value of those outcomes. What decisions does is it's just looking at, did the hitter swing or not? And it takes the holistic value of that pitch when the pitcher released it upon recording, and then it takes that total value away from the expected outcomes from the decision that the batter made. So if the batter swung, they are given the valuation for that pitch conditional on only a swing happening. And so if that's generally a good pitch to swing at, a swing will add value over what the expectation was of that pitch going into it. Same thing on the opposite end. If the outcomes of their decision sum up to be less than the total value of the pitch, then it is subtracting value from their decisions. With this, we can identify who's adding by value by a variety of different things, whether that's they add value by swinging, they add value by taking, they add value in the zone, they add value out of the zone, which we'll get into in a little bit. We take that run value and we put it on a 100 scale and standardize it at the league level so that a standard deviation is plus or minus 15 units. That is a plus scale. It's fairly typical in kind of the more advanced public stats realm. And so that's what I went with, again, for explainability and interpretability for our audience. Now, at the high level, it'll give a single number, but one of the things that's most interesting to me is we can use this to look at what hitters are adding or losing value and in given locations. So I listed out 4 here that kind of fit 4 general swing take profiles. Juan Soto, universally described to be a great decision maker. And you can see red here means at value added, blue is value lost. So he adds a ton of value below the zone, which generally means that he's taking pitches that are underneath the zone that he's probably not going to be able to do much with. And generally those pitches, if contact is made, it results in a ground ball. It's out of the strike zone, so it's generally going to be weakly hit. And so that's likely to result in an out, assuming he even makes contact. So I like to think of it as Juan Soto can hit for a high average with his eyes because he's swinging at hittable pitches and leaving ones he can't do damage with to go by him. Ezequiel Tovar is the aggressive profile, generally swinging at everything, almost indiscriminate of where it is. So he's adding value in the zone because those are good generally to swing at. And then he's also losing value out of the zone because he's also swinging at low value pitches. The flip side of that is someone like a Jonathan India, who is very passive. He swings at about 12% less likely than we'd expect. And you can see that adds a lot of value on those easy balls. Inside, high and in, low and away, but he's also leaving some meat on the bone in the strike zone that maybe he's letting hittable pitches go by, and that's costing him some value. And then finally on the far right is Anthony Santander. This is just a profile of, he doesn't appear based on this analysis to have a great approach as far as what to swing at, what not to swing at. He's kind of losing value across the full spectrum of the plate here. Something that's important to take into consideration, the run values are assuming a generic batter baseline. So they don't take into account anything specific about that hitter except the top and bottom of where their strike zone is, because that will inform what will be a called ball or a called strike. What we found is Decisions Plus is stabilizes after about 400 pitches, so about 50 plate appearances, usually how that shakes out. And for players with small samples, that Decisions Plus was actually found to be more predictive of next year's walk rate than walk rate was to itself. And that's helpful for maybe call-ups at the end of the season. You can get an idea of, okay, they're making good decisions. That's indicative that their walk rate will be X or Y. It's also useful earlier in the season because it does generally tend to stabilize fairly quickly, that you can have an idea of the walk rates for players earlier in the season. Maybe there's a change, or even as the season goes along, okay, well, let's take a look at, here's what his last 400 pitches are like. What's his decision value like? And that will kind of inform how well is he seeing the ball? How well is he deciding what to take? And is he matching coaching? Are we telling him to be more aggressive? Are we telling him to be more passive? Swing here, swing there? That this is a way to kind of quantify that. Moving on to Contact Plus, same general idea. We take the expected value of whether they make contact or not, and then subtract the expected value of all of the outcomes from them swinging. So all of the predicted outcomes, whiff, hit, foul, and then we take away whether they actually hit or whiffed. Generally, whiffing is going to be the preferred outcome. One of the things that I think is really interesting about doing an analysis like this is you get into the Javi Baez conundrum, where he is someone who generally throughout his career has really expanded the strike zone and swung at a lot of pitches that are maybe not inside, not ones he can do damage, but he has very good contact ability. But the problem is if you're swinging at that slider that's 3 inches off the plate low and outside, your predicted batted ball is going to be generally low value. And so in a situation where it's not 2 strikes, if you have 1 strike and you whiff, you just go to a 2-strike count. If you have 1 strike and you make contact there, what's actually going to happen is you're likely to be out, and you've now cost yourself the potential rest of that at bat. And so there are small kind of niche situations, but they do add up over time. So we can see who's adding, who's subtracting the most. Similar thing, we call it Contact Plus. On the same scale, 100's average, plus or minus 15% standard deviation. Something that's interesting with this is we can now contextualize things like chase rate or contact rates, that 2 players can run similar contact rates, but those can be differently valuable. That, for example, Zach Neto, he's great at making contact kind of up in the zone and away outside of the zone. And yes, some of it is out of the zone, but generally he adds value there and also generally hits like right in the meat of the zone. He's adding value with the contact he makes versus someone like Matt Olson, who actually makes contact on a rate basis more often than Zach Neto does. But the places he's making contact are down and in, down and away. The down and in, sometimes you can really golf those balls for loft if you make contact out in front, but those can also just result in whiffs. It's harder to kind of get the bat there. And then down and away is generally a hard place to hit a ball for a really impactful batted ball quality. So even though even though Olson runs a higher contact rate, it's maybe less valuable to what his overall profile provides just by looking at his contact. And finally, we have power, which is the expected value of a batted ball. Here, using just a two-component K nearest neighbors of launch angle and exit velocity. And then we subtract that outcome from the expected value of that batted ball based on the pitch characteristics. Generally, hitting the ball harder is better, and then hitting at extreme launch angles will subtract value. So your pop-ups, your ground balls, those are generally bad. And then it gets the terms are a little bit more mixed once you start to get more around the 20, the mid, like 10 to 30, 40 degree range. So now we're identifying who's adding value by hitting the ball hard and at the right angles. So different players utilize different swings with different paths, and those change how and where they can affect the ball. I know in the previous talk, which was great, we looked at how different bat speeds can affect the different locations and how batters will even change what their bat swing looks like to cover more locations, even if it's at the expense of bat speed. And so something that this does is it takes a look and you can kind of start to see, okay, this is where this specific player is adding value. This is where this specific player is adding value or losing value, whatever the case may be. Two players that I want to look at to kind of highlight, they run a similar overall power plus number at the season long level. Helio Ramos, he adds his value kind of up and away, up outside. He has a very fast swing. It's a little long, but this is backed up by his results. He has a very high 64% hard hit rate versus four seam fastballs. Bryce Harper does his damage lower and a little bit more inside. So both of these players are adding extra bases to the pitches that they face at a similar rate, but where and how they're doing it is very different and can also inform what the expected distribution of their results looks like. Finally, tying it all together is our holistic metric, which we call Process Plus, and that's kind of the title of the presentation and what I want to get into. It combines the other metrics into a single value, and we can do that because the previous metrics were all hierarchical, so we could scaffold them on top of each other. They're contingent on a decision or a contact from the prior model. And so we can add decision runs to contact runs to power runs and get the process runs for that batted ball. But we can also do that for swings and then subsequently for just takes as well, that we can actually give, this is how valuable this. So for every pitch now, we have, this is the value that this hitter has added to the quality of the pitch that they've faced. This has been shown to be similarly stable to decisions, which is about 400 pitches and about 50 plate appearances. And then once that threshold's been met, what was very fun to me was that it's found to be a better predictor of weighted runs created plus, so another like context inclusive batting stat. And I found that to be really helpful. That's basically was my barometer. And this was the idea behind this was to contextualize hitter results based on pitch quality. There wasn't necessarily the goal to be more predictive of results in the future, but I think generally controlling for context does allow you to better understand what a hitter is doing well, and how replicable that is. Something else that we're looking into is how to interpret this. And so this is a kind of a rolling chart that I've made that it breaks out each of the components of Process Plus. So that'll be purple is decisions, orange is contact, and green is power. And it has them along a rolling 400 pitches threshold. And that white line is the summation. That's their process plus. So you can see kind of where they fall, where they're getting their value from. So if the bar is over that midline 100, they're adding value. So here for Adley Rutschman, he's adding contact and power value at the beginning of the season. Something that's interesting about this is it makes it possible to track changes over time. I mentioned that you can see this with each of the individual stats, but now when you add them together, you can see how that batter's specific profile changes. So in the case of Adley Rutschman here, he was hit on the wrist by a foul tip on June 27th. And what we can see from his chart is that, well, the thing that it affected most is it completely sapped his power, that his ability to add extra base value to the pitches he saw plummeted after that injury, even though it didn't actually affect his ability to see the ball, which makes sense, or affect his ability to get the bat to the ball. And so that's an interesting thing to me of it can help with identifying maybe potential injury cases. It can help with identifying maybe if rehab and recovery is working well, if they're back to maybe pre-injury levels, or there's always the possibility that it's a conscious decision that maybe like the last presentation talked about, maybe they're trading for contact at the expense of power. Maybe they want to put more balls in play, whether that's a personal thing, whether that's brought on by the team suggestion, that it's there's a lot that we can do with this. And I think it's very interesting. And again, very relevant to what I do is that we can, it's narrative driven, that there are stories that can be told with this that are now like illustrative and backed by data. Additional metrics, because I generally try to think of this as a suite of metrics, that now we have all of these per pitch outcome likelihoods that we can see who's adding and subtracting here and there. Hitter aggression is probably one that I go to the most. So we have an estimate of how likely is a hitter to swing at this pitch for every pitch. And you can see, okay, who is swinging more often or less often than usual. I covered Ezekiel Tovar and Jonathan India in that decision charts. Tovar almost 16% more often, which was the top of the leaderboard. India swung 10.5% less, which was basically towards the bottom of our leaderboard for hitters with 2,000 pitches faced. Pitch hitability. This is kind of a fun one that was based off of a question from our user base. Basically, if we have outcome estimates for each pitch resulting in a hit, who is getting thrown pitches that are the most hittable or the least hittable? And Yordan Alvarez, the subject of the previous talk, is the hitter with the least hittable pitches. And to me, that explains that, yes, he's a very good hitter. I haven't shown his data, but anecdotally, he's extremely good at adding both contact value and power value. And so you don't want to throw him something that he can make contact. And so that's kind of backed here by how pitchers are approaching him. And on the opposite end, maybe you have hitters that pitchers aren't intimidated by. So Bryce Turing, that he's more of a slap hitter, speedster, and so pitchers probably aren't as concerned about him making contact and putting a ball in play, because that's maybe going to result in a single kind of at worst, that they're not too concerned about his batted ball quality. And then a similar hitter that sees a very few hittable pitches would be someone like a Javier Baez. So if you don't believe that someone is good at discerning the strike zone, then pitchers just won't throw them strikes. That makes sense. Strike zone judgment, similar to decisions, only it's just a binary, was it in the zone or not? And so this is just kind of who has an idea of what the strike zone is being called as. So it doesn't actually have to do with how valuable is that decision, but what is their understanding of the strike zone? And so that's kind of another one that provides interesting context. And then finally, at the end, we have these pitch quality measures and expectations, and we also have hitter results. And so now we can just control the actual observed results for the quality of the pitches faced. Finally, some further ideas that I'm working on is swing duration informs swing decisions. If you have a shorter swing, it allows you to see the ball travel longer. And so in theory, that can give you more time with which to make a decision. As we get more and more bat speed data, more years, more features, that we can start to see how things like swing length, swing duration, swing speed, and I'm excited for swing acceleration to combine some of those and that can inform, okay, how does that affect a hitter's decision value? Can we control for those things? And then individualized valuations. So these are all additive, like I said, and they're all based on a generic hitter. but there's probably a lot of insight to be gleaned from seeing how these stats combine together and add a specific hitter profile, whether that's their swing path, whether that's with the decisions they make, whether that's with their bat speed, that they may not, if the assumption is they're additive here, but that might not be the case. And that's an idea for me for future work. Awesome. Any questions?
You can pass it down.
Thank you. Yeah. Very good presentation. Very interesting. This may relate a little bit to your that last bullet point you shared, but I'm curious if you have any impression of which of those three components is most valuable or most important. Like as you're coaching a player, for example, should you focus more on one or another, or is it going to end up being player dependent?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's power. That adding power to the pitches that you make contact with is where that's the widest distribution. That's where, your Aaron Judges, your Shohei Ohtani's, even your Juan Soto's, that's where they all add significant amounts of value. The way that I kind of conceptualize these three stats is on a spectrum of decisions sets your talent floor. Contact informs how you get to that, and then power informs your ceiling. So if you can add a lot of power, that makes you a very high ceiling player, and then whether you get there or not is more contextual on your ability to swing at the right pitches and make contact on those pitches.
Great presentation. I was just curious, when hitters go through slumps, do any one of these metrics tend to pop out?
Generally it will be power. That's the most variable because it is also kind of the smallest sample statistic that we're looking at. It's reliant on batted balls. I generally, when I'm looking just at power, I do a rolling batted ball measure, but you can kind of see if something's off, it's generally going to be off in their swing, and that will likely result in them either mishitting or hitting for less power, and that will pop up there. And then that's also a measure to see like, oh, okay, they're back. So anecdotally, Aaron Judge at the beginning of last year had like a April that was pretty flat by power, and that was kind of odd for him. And then sure enough, once like May hit and he warmed up into the season, that ramped back up. And so I was like, okay, he is slumping. He's not adding quite the value that we're used to. And then it went back to a typical Aaron Judgian level for him. Just to kind of double up on that the others decisions, I think, is much more approach based. That I think decisions are kind of hard to slump. That, maybe if a guy starts pressing, he might start swinging more, but generally that's the most stable of the three.
For decisions plus, I didn't know if like you deep dived into any like pitch type like correlation just to see like how like swing decisions work.
Yeah, so this controls, one of the inputs is I bucket based on what the pitch type is. So a fastball, breaking ball, off speed, and I do control for platoon effects. Sorry, I did not message that before, but generally it falls into just because of where the pitches are located, that if someone adds decision value high, they're making good decisions on fastballs. Same thing low is, depending on where it is, it might be a breaking ball low and away or an off-speed pitch low and inside. That's where they add value. And so you can subset these plots to see like, okay, he struggles with a breaking ball in this location and succeeds against a fastball in this location, both at what he swings at, what he makes contact with, and what he adds power value to. Awesome.